expert advice is on the way. We are here with Jennie Joseph, midwife and executive director of the Birthplace. Thank you, Jennie, for joining us today on the couch.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
Fabulous, fabulous. So we have tons of questions. Let me flip to my question page, which I don't seem to have, so we'll just make one up. Okay. Let's see. We were wondering, like I went through the different types of female genital mutilation.
Yes.
Why do you think it is? Okay, they were saying if they remove part or the total clitoris that you're not supposed to have any kind of sexual desire. Why?
Well, there are nerve endings obviously there, and that's one of the most important areas of the body as far as the number of nerve endings, and obviously heightened sensation, and there's purpose to that. That is the seat of sexual pleasure. Nonetheless, you were mentioning earlier, and I agree with you, that there's more of a mental and a psychological component to sexual desire. It's not just all physically located in this one spot.
Right.
You've heard of erogenous zones. So for some women it's the earlobe, you know, for some women it's the nipple. It just depends.
Yeah.
So if you want to follow that theory and that thinking, you'd have to remove all the erogenous zones to remove all the sexual desire.
Well, don't let that get out the bag.
Exactly.
Oh,
so
goodness.
you see how if you put that into that perspective, it changes this whole ideal of what we're talking about. Really what's at the bottom line here is that this is culturally deep. This is just generational, that has almost like it's been the thing to do. And so it continues. And you're absolutely correct. The education is going to change this behavior and this procedure. And so people have not been educated to the level of understanding that that one thing is not going to prevent a woman from having sexual desire. But there are many other reasons why it's done.
Okay.
You know, myriad reasons why it's done.
Wow.
Well, my question is that I know that the believers of this practice say that it is an essential part of raising girls properly, right?
Yes.
Now that girls are regarded as being cleansed by the removal of male body parts. Now that is that one thing that, you know, that's really, you know, it really
just gets you riled up because you understand it from a different place. But let's put it in another perspective. Women, mothers, grandmothers, family members have tried for centuries. I mean, you've heard of the chastity belt. Do you remember when they locked you into a metal belt and back in the day? This has been an ongoing issue for humankind, that, you know, this whole sense that we should control our daughters or protect our daughters from the male, you know, having power over our daughters. Yet the very problem that we're trying to prevent, we sort of create, because now we're also putting more, we're taking power from her. And in this sense, it's actually a human rights violation. But you've taken on something that you really cannot control, because since time began, we've not been able to curtail, you know, developing women any more than we've been able to curtail developing men.
Right.
Because as sexuality begins to blossom, so it does. You have no power over that. So with these efforts, these were ways to try to say, okay, we'll have some control over this, and we'll try to use this method, this particular method, and use this to keep women or young girls under control. You can't do it. It's not possible. Now, you can raise girls with morals, you can raise girls with inside of religion, you can raise girls with education and support, and you may have some impact. But even now, in this current day and age, look how we struggle with young women.
Right.
Every woman who has a daughter has a fear in her heart that this child will grow and become pregnant too soon, will be exposed to something she shouldn't be too early, will be at risk, right? And conversely, every father, what's that little joke? Oh, I'm going to be at the door with the shotgun when it's time for her to start dating. Why? Because the male recognizes what he's trying to protect his daughter from. So this is a perennial problem, and each culture has chosen different ways to handle it. So sometimes we get judgmental because we don't understand circumcision, female genital mutilation. We don't understand why culturally this is still continuing. Yet it's part of that same piece for all of us, where we're trying to protect our children in the way that we think is the best.
Is the best way, right. Wow.
Wow.
So we were also talking about, okay, aside from the clitoris being cut off, sewing up the vaginal opening.
Yes.
And of course it's not medically necessary,
It's
but
not.
I mean, what dangers, what happens when you do that?
It is so dangerous. It is beyond belief that people were so inventive to take this so far that they've ended up causing this horrendous harm and a threat to the young woman's life. When you look at what's happened, even like you were mentioning, this, the matchstick size hole, I mean, sometimes it's a little bit bigger, but even that is not enough sometimes for the menses, for the period to escape. Many women are harmed and are actually led to infertility because of the buildup of the period, the
Wow.
blood every month behind that area. There is no escape. So the blood collects. Because don't forget, behind where there's been the closure is still a vagina and a cervix and a uterus. So while that uterus is bleeding every month, because you have no power over the hormones.
Right.
You see, it's simply a local incision in an area, but it has no impact on the cycle. So the period continues, and it just builds in the vagina, and it backs up, and it becomes infected. It can cause numerous harm into the uterus, into the tubes, scarring, pain, cysts. Okay? This is something that is just beyond belief. And then mix urination in there, because every time she passes urine, she's emptying her bladder into the vagina.
Right.
And certain amounts of the urine is going to pass through, coming through the little hole, but much of it may not. So you see how easy it is to get a urine infection.
Oh my
Yes.
God.
Just living in Florida, you know,
Right,
the
right.
heat. So imagine. So this horrendous harm and pain and this continuation of this tradition, it just speaks to the level of the depth that we have, as human beings, have decided that we want to control our bodies and ultimately our women. Once again, our women are suffering at the hands of tradition. Now, I will say this, it's the women that do the circumcision.
Right, it is.
The women want that. If the woman, I mean, it seems that especially the elderly women, the elder women, and the you know, the grannies and the mothers, they're the ones that insist on that for the young women.
Okay.
The husbands very rarely, or the men very rarely, do the procedure. It's the women doing it to each other. And so, again, it's sort of, I mean, I think it's a traditional sort of keeping up with the Joneses, if you will.
Wow.
Okay.
There's a prestige to having that done. And that answers the question, why do European Africans, you know, immigrant Africans, send their daughters back? Because there's a prestige. There's an effort to show, look, we're holding on to ways that have been with our traditions for, you know, for centuries,
Right.
and we are staying. We look at us, we're doing this to show that we have not forgotten our roots.
Wow.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
I would've
it's a
never thought
very
that.
deep psychological thing, and so I found it very hard in preparing for the show to reserve judgment and not to get into trying to understand why it's being done,
Right.
but to more put the point across that the education is necessary for people to realize the harm. If you've not had any real input as to why this is harmful, if you've known in your family, well, you know, 1, 2, 3 of the daughters or the aunties or the grandmas made it through, they're okay, you'll keep going.
Right.
I see.
You see? So you may have one here and one there that doesn't have a good experience. But if people are still living in poverty, they don't have access, they're not even going to follow up. This young woman who never had a baby, nobody's maybe asking why. It's just, oh, you know, Susie, she didn't have a baby. And that's the end of it.
And that's it. That's as
Are you
far as
saying
That's as far as it
spectrum
goes.
Are you saying in
Right.
America?
No, in
or
Africa. I'm talking about
Well,
in
you know,
Africa.
a lot of times in Africa, we were talking about that. One of the ladies staying with me was mentioning that in Africa, if you do not have a child, it's a horrible stigma
Yes, it is.
attached to it. But what I'm thinking now is that what you were saying about Europeans and how people are going to other countries and they're still sending their children back. I guess my question would be to them is, in coming to the United States and recognizing all these things, these ill things that are happening, why are you still living with tradition if in fact you have come to a country and become more educated as far as health is concerned?
Well, Roxy, that's an excellent question, but it also speaks to this complete dichotomy we have in developed nations, first world nations, where we're emulating what everybody has. That's why we came in the first place. And yet when we get here, we realize, we don't actually want this.
Yes.
Okay.
Do we really want this? You know, do we want this lack and breakdown of family, lack and breakdown of morals, lack and breakdown of any kind of virtue that gives you a reason to be strong and firm in who you are and what you stand for? It's very difficult once you're this displaced
Right.
and you're looking for what you think is the, you know, the land with streets paved of gold, with gold, and you find something quite different. In fact, you may even be more likely to want to do that because now you're looking at what your daughter's having to endure just to go to school.
True.
Or just to travel public transportation. Just, do you see? So
Yeah, oh, I
in
see. I'm
everybody's
understanding.
different ways, you know, culture by culture by culture, we keep creating ways to try to hold on to what's ours,
Okay.
keep our girls safe, manage inside of these environments that aren't what we necessarily thought they were.
Right.
And yet, I don't know that we've got any real good answers. So someone choosing this as an answer may not make sense in our world, and yet in theirs it may make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
Wow.
Do you see? So it's like we've got some areas here where we've got some real things to discover and to explore, and yet at the same time protect, because without the information, these young women will not be protected from this procedure.
Okay. Now, I realize that it is a human right violation, and I've done the studies that show there are no health benefits
all.
to it. But what are some of the health, problems that can assist with this procedure to little girls or even young girls?
One of the ones that is obvious is that during the actual procedure they could die because of the hemorrhage. Okay, this is a very difficult thing to contain as far as once the bleeding begins. And remember, there isn't a will to do anything as far as, like, people don't do a circumcision and have suture material on the standby in case they need to suture up. See, so in my field, for example, I'm delivering a baby. If a woman should tear, I'm going to suture her up. That's my goal. I'm there to do that, to put it back together.
Right.
They're actually trying to open, and then they use the binding of the legs to staunch the flow of blood.
Wow.
If that doesn't work, there isn't a backup plan. So the number one risk for young women, any woman, is hemorrhage. Secondly, followed very closely by infection, because while this area is healing, she's still urinating.
Right.
Oh,
Okay? She still has to defecate. She has all of these things that are issues that are playing into this very raw and open area, which has often been taken into that, she's been taken into that position without even having clean instruments, rusty or, old or used previously. So HIV is spread very readily because of not using clean instruments.
Wow.
Yes?
Wow.
So there's an increase there. So then the longer term repercussions, number one of which I believe is psychological.
Yeah.
yeah.
The young women don't understand at this point. Now, those that have been brainwashed or have been really told from a very early age to expect this, there's a certain element of them expecting and looking forward to it because it's proof that they're a woman or proof that they've joined the club, so to speak. But for the most part, deep down, there's a question in a young girl's mind, why? And you know how young girls will internalize. So it becomes, what did I do? What have I done wrong to deserve this? Have I been bad? Am I wrong? And shame.
Okay.
Okay, and this carries on throughout her adult life.
Wow.
Right, and we were talking about kind of the shame where I think it's done, female genital mutilation, because of the way guys look at us, the way men look at us. If they didn't lust after us and want us sexually, then maybe we wouldn't have to go through the female genital mutilation, so we're not as desirable as they make us seem.
Well, and both sides of that. There's also that the woman is commodity, that we have power to affect how this package will look, and we show that by demonstrating this woman has this look because, and that means whatever it means to whoever's the buyer, if you will.
Right.
So we've got both sides of that, but again, playing into these social trends and these mores that say that women aren't much of anything, not worth a whole lot. It's the same with child marriage, the dowry for the young girl, the commodification of womanhood.
Okay.
You see, and it starts so early. Now, I always have to throw off, on the other side of the coin, and so I want us to think about male circumcision for newborn babies in America.
Right.
Now, you talk about a shock. When I got here from England 20 years ago, I wasn't used to every other baby being cut, but it's still cutting. Those babies are in as much excruciating pain as the young girl at 8 or 10 having a female circumcision.
Right.
Yes.
And the excuse, but he needs to look like his daddy in the shower.
Wow.
Excuse me? That's a reason to take the foreskin that is supposed to be there and take it off. So when there's a religious reason, I understand that very clearly. When it's for, this is what we've always done.
Right.
Do you see how suddenly we're all on the same page?
Right.
Yes.
See, and
but-
I wondered about that, though. I'm sorry,
No
Z, but
problem.
I kind of thought circumcision was maybe medically necessary at some
Not
point.
at all.
I did
Not
too.
at all?
I thought
Not
it
at
was
all.
a clip for them to be clean.
Right.
You always taught that
No?
the foreskin carried a lot of germs and things, and so it was necessary to cut that off.
Yes,
and
but
that's,
it's interesting because unfortunately in the United States a lot of stuff has been said as medically necessary, and we go ahead and yes, okay. Like, you know me on labor and delivery, don't get me started, so we'll stick with the topic. But, at the end of the day, the rest of the world where boys are not circumcised routinely, there isn't a higher incidence of any infection in the penis, or even there's been
way.
studies that show that cervical cancer, because of the cross infection between the male and the female, is not increased because of the circumcision or lack of circumcision. Like
Wow.
there isn't really much credence to that
Right. Okay.
reason.
Okay.
Okay, and foreskins move. Men know this,
Right,
believe me,
right.
and you can clean. It's not complicated.
well, that is true, but I do have two boys, and it was very important for me, not just on, a religious stance, because,
Yes.
We do know that, but for me, it was the cleanliness. I
right.
really did believe that
Of course.
it was very clean. But what I didn't appreciate was the fact that the doctors wanted to go ahead and cut my little baby without any anesthesia.
Exactly. Now, why not? Think about it. If it was
No, they
something-
did.
I know, but
They did.
This is a standard. You don't anesthetize for circumcision. Why? Is this a newborn? For goodness sake.
Oh, no, both of my children did.
They were anesthetized.
They had to be, because
Right.
it wasn't going to go down.
All right. So you
hear those
intervened.
babies. You hear them.
I used to hold the
screaming.
babies.
Yeah, you hear them.
And it is a pitiful thing, and it's no different to a younger girl, even a teenager. Any person will feel that because those areas are specifically very sensitive, myriad nerve endings, because of the purpose of those pieces. They're there to provide sexual satisfaction.
So in
We
your
are perfectly made.
In your opinion, that's what I was going to say. Should we leave it the way that God made it?
Absolutely. Why would we ever mess with something so perfect?
Wow.
Okay.
I like the way you put that.
Just
I
saying.
mean, that makes sense. But then,
Yeah, it
okay,
does.
so if we're not going to be doing the female genital mutilation or circumcisions purely based off of wanting to get rid of the sexual desire,
Yes.
how do we then teach girls? What should we be telling
Yeah.
our girls and young men to do? So, I mean, we can
Right.
kind of move past the
I think-
mutilation.
For people who are already aware that this is not a healthy practice, that's the answer. That's what you tell them. There is no medical reason for either male or female, and that is information that is not being shared.
Right.
I think we've got a bigger job, a deeper job to do in Africa, India, the Saudi, wherever this is happening, to do a different level of education, because we have to break a tradition.
Exactly.
That's asking a lot.
Yeah,
That's
it is.
asking a lot of
Yes, it
people.
is.
Yes,
So
it is.
we can't come judgmental when we come with our information.
Right.
We have to stay factual. That's the
Wow.
best way to make this change.
And that is why we have expert advice,
Yes.
plain and simple. Stay tuned. Up next is Z with the email bag. Thank you, Jenny, for joining us.
Thank
That
you.
was fabulous, honey.
you.
You
Thank
guys
you.
stay right here. We've got more for you on Point of View.